Hi, everyone. Welcome, and thank you so much for wanting to share your Friday evening with us, especially when we have actual sunlight still out there. So, just really thank you. My name's Fazana Khan. I'm one of the co-founders and co-directors of Resourcing Racial Justice, and
I'm Nusra, another co-founder of Resourcing Racial Justice, and it's just so amazing to see people and not like floating heads on a screen around the room. So thank you again for being here with us.
Um, and of course, we always have to begin with thanks and gratitude and recognition. To be here today, many hands have enabled it, and some are with us in this room, and some are not, and some were not even when we were building RRJ, but were with us in spirit. So just taking a moment to acknowledge our loving and chosen ancestors, our families, our freedom fighters, the liberation workers, the healers, all of those that have brought us to this moment so we can share space together and to attend to the work of resourcing racial justice, which really means the end of capitalism, death to capitalism and death to colonization. That's where we're at. And I just also want to bring in the report, we intentionally took some time. I think we dedicated, a substantial writing to thank lots of people. And then even then, not everyone was probably on that page. But there are a few people who aren't able to be here today, but we just want to presence them. We want to presence Jenny Oppenheimer, who's away and hopefully basking in the sun somewhere. So big up Jenny. Also Nikki Clegg and Tiff Webster. And many of our awardees, some of them that we got to redistribute and invest in at RRJ, you'll get to meet and chat to. But then there's so many others that couldn't be here today. And as always, they're organizing and mobilizing and hopefully also some of them resting on a Friday night. So just bringing and calling them into the space. In terms of the schedule for this evening, what we've got is myself and Nusrat kind of framing and contextualizing a little bit. And then we will have Marai and an incredible panel of demonstrators, people who have built at scale in crisis with depth across space and time and many temporalities and geographies. And so everything that you see in the report that we were trying to reach for and to express, in some ways they have done it, they have taught us how to do it, or they're experimenting in those realms. And so for us, putting together this panel was to, including the chair Marai, was to take what's in the page and for you to hear the nuances, the rigor, the complexities that they are holding and grasping with. And actually many of you in this room are also doing it, but just to hold it together. And then we've invited for our keynote Yvonne, and Yvonne's gonna kind of close out our space with some reflections as a practitioner of possibilities, as someone who's built across decades and laid a lot of groundwork like the panelists as well. And then just some closing remarks. And then we will close at 9, but actually I know that so many of you, I could hear the tantalizing conversations. So we're here to mingle. Why not spend your Friday night hanging out with us? So yeah, that the space will be free for us to just hang and chill and talk to one another in a way that isn't coordinated fun, but just, us being together. So in the spirit of being, there's 2 things I want to presence or bring into the space. And I think the best way to do that, we've just spent the last couple of days here in this space as part of Healing Justice London. And I also want to just thank the Healing Justice London team, Rebecca, Alex, Sarah, and Kat, because they generously let me wear both hats and have really rallied around making today happen. And so just really acknowledging and uplifting their labor and their care and their love in making this space. So yeah, we've been doing this incredible politicized semantics training to really grow capacity for our movements. And our movements, we say capital M movements, which means all of us that are attending to the work of collective liberation, and how we can meet the moment of the poly crises that are happening. And it's been deep because Stacey, we've made Stacey's name a verb. We say Stacey Cade because she makes us go there. But what feels really important as part of being in that practice and trying to find new postures and new patterns with one another is to take a moment to find where we are in place in this moment. So I'm just going to invite everyone to just find where you are in place. So whatever position that you want to take that helps you find a shape that supports you to be here in as much as you can be here. And what it means for many of us, especially who come from marginalized communities, that our being here is not light. It's of light, but it's not light. And so to feel the gravity of our being here and to hold that. And as we're holding our being here, is there anyone we want to bring in to be with us? Just to call them in. And then just take a moment to find and sense your aliveness. And I like to do that with breath. So just bringing awareness. And our Alex Bledsoe, who's sitting right here, often invites us to take the deepest breath we've taken all day. So if that feels like something you want to do, can you let yourself be breathed? And can you let yourself take the deepest breath you've taken today? And when you're ready, you can just find yourself back here in this space. Breath felt a really important space to start. And one of our colleagues at Healing Justice London, who I also want to presence, who couldn't be here today, Dr. Stephanie Davies, is currently working on a research on pandemics, the age of pandemics and colonization. And she was sharing recently with us a phrase by Nelson Mandela Torres, and the phrase that he says is, coloniality is perpetual war and is a state of constant breathlessness. And when she was sharing this research that she's working on, one of the things that she said to us is that the pandemic, we're still in a pandemic and many pandemics, but the start of the pandemic did something, or exposed or revealed something, in the sense that with George Floyd, our communities, racialized communities, we've had many moments of deep distress, deep loss, and Grenfell in our recent memories. Yet George Floyd perhaps confronted whiteness with death because we were also navigating the pandemic, which made death so proximate and so intimate for people who this was more of an exceptional thing or a natural thing. And so this is the context in which we mobilized for resourcing racial justice. The intimacy of death, which is alive for all of us, especially now, and in solidarity and recognizing the Palestinians, the Congolese, the Haitians, the Sudanese, and all marginalized people who are resisting that teaching of life that Palestinians often affirm comes from also that intimacy of loss and death. And so it feels weird to talk about breath, but holding breath as the aliveness that we want to generate. And so much of resourcing racial justice in this report, you'll hear, talks about what is life affirming, what extends life, what are the deepest reservoirs and resources beyond money that we can start to access, and how do we shift out of the types of transactional, extractive economies and ecologies that have become our patterns, the way we are with one another, and that also invite us into types of death. One of the things that Nusrat and I often have reflected on over the past 4 years of RRJ and building resourcing racial justice is how much we died. There were many moments in which the physical act and the emotional toll of two women of color in a very violent field and sector with deep accountability in relationship to movements and elders felt like we were dying, and also that something so life-giving was happening to us as well. And so today, as we kind of move through this session, I want to hold what needs to die in us so that we can give birth and life to the new worlds that we're calling in. What are we prepared to lose, especially so many of us who might be in positions of power, and that's all of us in different ways. And what are we prepared to risk and in order for all of us to access more life, more aliveness, because the ways in which our economies are designed are absolutely against that aliveness and life. And I really want to hold Suhair Hamad's words, affirm life, we've got to carry each other now. Thank you, and I'm going to hand over to Nusrat.
Okay. Hi, everyone. It's so wonderful to be with everyone here today. The report talks a lot about patterning and repatterning. As we move towards the worlds we're trying to create, things are going to get messy. There's going to be a lot of contradictions, and there's also going to be a lot of beauty. And the second half of the report that you're all holding spends a lot of time talking through strategies that we identified that helped us to repattern. So I'm going to talk about one, maybe two of them. We'll see how much time that we have. The first is about visioning, and the second is about holding risk, if we have time. If not, you can read it. So here we go. So what looks like somewhere is often home calling us back. What if the vision is a memory? The world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over announcing your place in the family of things. Mary Oliver. If the logic and the premise of oppression is to separate and rupture, then all acts of healing and liberation are necessarily remembrance. From this postulation, our orientation for what is a vision in movement work and broader justice is then ancestral, indigenous, and futuristic. Our meaning of indigeneity is like the word radical, in that it means bringing us back to the literal roots. It is the state of being that is not repackaged by hundreds and hundreds of oppressive social constructs, from gender, race, class, etc., and instead in deep, animate relation with all life and living worlds appropriately. It means, as Mary Oliver says, we are placed in the family of things, and through kinship we are accountable and responsible for all life. What this offers us is an account for what our visioning for just and dignifying lives and futures must grapple with. We must grapple with how we dream in emerging worlds that expand the interdependence of our relational connections across time and space. This metaphysical move is not unfamiliar to the psyches of those who are uncolonized or decolonizing, meaning they have not allowed the severance of Cartesian logic, I think, therefore I am, to steal or dispossess their ability to know the deeper valves from which life and therefore learning flows. From this place, our ability to vision is corresponding with our ability to connect and be in relational connection and consciousness. Vision setting then requires us to grow the embodied connective tissue to hold the multitudes that have existed before and will be existing in the future simultaneously as our ongoing launch pad. This is less a mystical point and more a practice of scenario planning at scale. What will be present? What has been projected into? Where are we intended to be? This skillful practice is not about sharpening the cognitive capacity to predict or calculate through analytics what is to come. It is a deeply spiritual practice. By spiritual practice, we mean a discipline that nurtures a deep relationship to connection and receptivity. We must practice a deep intimacy with aliveness and listening amidst the ever-changing unpredictability that is now going to be our new normal. The work of vision setting will require an even sharper capacity to carry forward the wisdoms of those who have charted unknowns, and to do this with permission and consent instead of biomimicry and appropriation. The ability to do this well is a spiritual leap, because it is the practice of trusting in maneuvering where there is very little clarity in the relation sense and often generated in unempirical ways. The act of recommitting towards something that is not yet manifest is like waiting for a child to be born. While there is a deep internal feeling that something is there, until the baby has emerged into the material world, it feels like a myth. We're using this analogy to remind us that we are in the practice of spiritual leaps all the time anyway. The invitation is to take this capacity and grow it so we can learn new worlds. So much of what we don't know is not only a direct result of hundreds of years of oppressive fragmentation, but also because of how the living worlds no longer trust us to be in right relationship with them. We can look to the great visionaries of our time who were not prophetic in nature, but skillful in connecting the multitudes that exist and have to be arranged and organized to develop new sets of images that can hold the arising circumstances in ever-changing flux. One more?
You guys want a little bit more?
I'll read one more then. Risk. So this piece is about risk. Oh, I don't need that. Thank you. And it's called Holding the Center Together. We originally wanted to write a piece on risk. We wanted to write on risk because the entire time we were building RRJ felt like we were under threat and in danger. The threats and misconceptions about our work were a constant landmine we had to navigate. The emotional and physical stress of this at points became unbearable to the point where we were ready to abandon the experiment. We share this to visibilize the toll and intensity it takes for any of us trying to do this propositional work that is by its very nature a threat to the status quo. It is not just a threat to the current dominant structures, it is also a threat to where all of us have found safety in it. The parts of us that are cooperating with oppression are so afraid of unknowns that the instability of new ways is unbearable. What we were doing was not groundbreaking in innovation. There were others who were innovated in the field in more robust and useful ways. What we were holding, however, is what it means to do this work in a field trained to endanger Black and global majority people, and to do so out loud. Over the years, we have encountered so many forms of risk, from how it is weaponized to how it is shirked, all of us, which continue to endanger us. Throughout this section, we want to discuss risk with carefulness in order to start to untangle the ways risk has been used. Instead of it being used as a preemptive assessor of safeguarding, we have continually found that it to be the very tool that made us unsafe. This is important to state clearly because on matters of safety, we cannot be ambiguous. The ambiguity that the field of philanthropy and charitability rely on has given it the agility to deem us unsafe without any clear reason or markers. We have routinely been discussed as risky in unnamed, arbitrary, and ambiguous ways. We refuse this. What we often see as a perceived threat by institutions within the heart of empire is a continued need to assign threat in order to protect property and profit. The racialization of risk has its roots in centuries of colonization. Colonizers constructed arbitrary demarcations of barbarity in order to subjugate us. This is an ever-present logic. Few tasters there.
So it goes deep. And one of the things that you'll find, hopefully, or maybe quite explicitly, is that we thought we were writing a report and that report was writing us. And so there's a guide to how to travel with this guide, because it's a guide in itself. Definitely was guiding us, is that you'll see, as hopefully any of this work, and for those of us committed to transformation, is that we are also transformed by it. And in this guide, we really want you to take the time to not do what white supremacy trains us in solutionism and fixing culture, but to take time to grapple with, challenge, sit, muse, reflect, take time with it. It's not copy and paste, DEI kind of thing, but actually to be in the practice of study and rigor. And that's the invitation I'm going to pause on. Thank you so much for receiving us. We're going to now invite Marai to kind of call in our panel and our demonstrators and practitioners of possibility. Firstly, I just want to, we both actually really want to acknowledge and uplift Marai. It was no accident that we'd ask you to hold space, because you have been holding so many movements across decades, and so many of us across decades. And you've also been part of initiating and building many things. But one of the things that we have seen you in is in this act of rigor and discipline and practicing differently. You are right there beside us, like you're in the trainings. As soon as we say we need you right here beside us, let's practice together, let's practice different ways. You're in it with absolute humility, with absolute capacity to want to hold the center with us and to invite us into the deeper parts of ourselves. And that feels rare. And so just really wanting to acknowledge what it means for us to have you right there beside us in practice, in rigor and discipline, and to thank and acknowledge you in that. So we're going to sidestep and let the incredible panel come through.
Thank you. Ooh. Thank you both. You're not supposed to start off cheering by crying, but it could happen. Panel folk, do you want to kind of come forward so we can, just take up space? So, we can just have you up here. Yeah, beautiful. All right. Ancestral greetings, beloved ones. It's an honor to be with you. As we say in Rasta, how beautiful is it for I and I to come together in Einity. Einity is radical harmony. It's the capacity to hold difference and yet be in a particular rhythm together. I have the absolute privilege of chairing this panel. I've also been asked to say a few things, so I'm just going to do that now. So when Fazan and Nusrat, the way they move is just like, there was no like, Mara, will you? There was like, Mara, you are doing this thing, right? So when they shared with me that I was going to be doing this, I really asked Spirit to guide me in terms of what needed to be spoken. And as I was holding and like just being with what needed to be spoken, I had a moment where I was filled with real, like, huge grief, deep grief. It was so random on one level, like I found myself crying, and it just didn't make any sense, like on so many levels. And then I was just like, okay, like I need to start by speaking about grief. And Fazana and Nuz have already mentioned and spoken about grief. So I want to acknowledge this. Most of us have no idea what it took to birth and hold RRJ. We have no idea what it cost you. We know that a group of humans loved us enough to create a rupture in a system called philanthropy, a system that was not designed to free us. We don't know what relationships were strengthened and broken. We don't know what died, what was lost. But I know that this work is imbued with centuries, not only with centuries of ancestral and collective grief, but with the immediate grief of being in this work. And so on behalf of us, I acknowledge and honor your grief and what it took to light this fire. And I'm just going to ask us to hold that for a brief moment. We also acknowledge and thank the different generations who've done this work from the inside at great personal cost. OGs like Jenny Oppenheimer, my bro Derek Bardwell over there, folk like Paulette Amadi and Rihanna Reid, Jane Tanner, Vanessa Thomas, like people who unapologetically center melanated folk. Like it's a thing. It's a thing to be explicit in the fact that we are valued, because most of us have to fly under the radar in them things. And so we want to say that we see you and we hear you and we give thanks. Actually, can you all give some thanks? Like, what is... Yeah, like, we've been in 3 days of somatic work. Like bring your body to this thing. This is not a head thing. This is a heart thing, a belly thing, a spirit thing. Like, bring yourself, yeah? And I also want to say to all of us, there is no way to resource racial justice, to attempt to counter interlocking systems of oppression without entering the space of grief. Right? And the space of uncertainty. Like, if we're looking to deal with shit that we already know, boy, it ain't gonna happen. Right? We can resource race equality. Yeah, we could do that. But to resource racial justice demands and calls us in to be in the deep work of grief. So I want to offer a little reflection based on my own relationship with RRJ. In November 2019, a group of black/global majority feminists met in a Caribbean vegan restaurant in Dalston, because that's what we do. Yeah, we were like ends. It don't matter how you gentrify, it's ends, yeah? The sisters had answered a call that I put out to gather, to think about what it would be like to resource a black global majority feminist space. This was a moment that the dream that became Project Talawa was first projected onto the screens of our imagination. A black feminist initiative focused on collective liberation, on who we could be. And as we began the slow process of gentle and intentional emergence, and we were figuring out our form or legal status, etc., we were grappling with the fact that I was supposed to be doing a road show, and now we had a pandemic. I lost my mom. RRJ dropped, and we were like, yes, yes, yes. RRJ gave us the affirmation, the sense that we were not alone, that our resistance to the charitable structures was felt and lived elsewhere, that it was possible to, as my sister Shay says, it was possible to fuck shit up. That we don't have to drop into business as usual, that using the master's tools, as Audre Lorde said, will never dismantle the master's house. And while some of us have to fight from within, and we really acknowledge that that is work, some of us also have to have the courage to go to the edge of the village. Some of us have to be courageous enough, wild enough, loving enough to turn ourselves inside out, to build the alternative, the life-affirming, the radical. And it takes something. For us at Project Talawa, therefore, RRJ is part of our DNA, it's part of our lineage, and we thank you. We thank you, Nuz, you showed up in Baobab. We thank you for like the way that the work has traveled. We hold deep gratitude. And to the Project Talawa crew in the house, you know, like, I am blessed to be doing this work with you. All right, so now to the panel, and we can take some breaths. Okay, Indy, Farah, Gabriella, Stacey. Folks are going to introduce themselves, so I'm not going to do like no long bio. So one of the ways that that could be is just like how you want to be known in the space. So.
Would you like that? Good evening. My name's Indy Johar, but so Am I just doing introductions, or do you want me to do my thing? Okay, do my thing. Okay, I'll do my thing. So I don't feel very equipped to talk to the sensitivities and the brilliances of the room in this room. And I want to start by saying that, because I think there is a type of work that many of you have done that invisibly I stand on the shoulders of. And I want to start by acknowledging that. And yet I also see other things, perhaps, that I can bring back to this the brilliance of this room. And I want to start by saying that the master's house has already burnt down. And I think it's important to recognize that the master's house has already burnt down. Soils are degraded. The fish in the sea, if you look at number of actually what we've done, if you look at, we are living in a moment where actually all of us are self-terminating. And I think because the illusion is that there is something else, it's already dead. That's, I think, an important place to start. I think the truth is being born in places like this. And the truth is a different truth because it's deeply rooted in a different way of being that many of you embody. And it's embodied by the way you relate to each other and the nuance and the particularity of the language and positions that you use in your everyday words. And I think it's really important. The new world is crafted in the very words that you speak to each other. And then I think it starts to say, and the old world traps us in every step of the move. So, and I want us to, and this has been the journey I suppose I've been part of. Whether it is the contract of employment, that is an act of power, dominion, and control. Whether it is the act of property, it is an act of power, dominion, and control. The way we produce money is an act of centralized production of capital and power and control. Our whole thesis of how we've governed the world has been governed through a theory of control as a means of organizing. The fight between capitalism and communism was an illusion because both were theories of control. The only difference was who controlled, but they were still delusions of control. And if we wish to move beyond this, and I think this is the brilliant work that's happening by all of you in this room, and many, whether it's the life-affirming infrastructure, life-affirming economies, I think what's brilliant and necessary is that we have to recode all these things. You cannot take them for granted. It is no surprise that our soils are dying because soils don't exist on the balance sheet of farms. They don't exist. They don't exist. This is why we consume our soils to the point that actually our soils are dying in front of us. And it is in the coding of that world that we are constructing our own doom. And also it is in the language and the precision of your language, you're setting the seeds of the new codes. The reason why, whether it's interbecoming or whether it's, these words are not just words, they're precisions of a new code that has to be built. The reimagination of yourself and the reimagination of ourselves in relationship is a fundamental transformation of every code around you. And what I find amazing is this world is coming into being everywhere. It is not yet clear, but whether, and I would, from my world, it would be whether it's a universal basic income movement. It's a theory of beyond labor. This is the fight. The laborization of us, the control of us to units of instrumentalization. It's not. And it is no longer a fight because the old world of labor no longer works in a theory of complexity, care, creativity. It doesn't work. The master's house doesn't work anymore. Or whether it's in the theory of property. it was really interesting. I have to be really honest about this. I was once told, like, oh, you have to ask permission from something, say the chair, to use it. And I was like, this was a few years ago, and I was like, I don't get this. I actually don't get it. And somebody said it to me recently, actually, Fazana was talking about this. And I realized it was important. It wasn't the thing I was asking permission from, it was all the labor and the world that came to being to make that chair. And in the act of permission, I was giving myself permission to be in right relationship with, to be in care and stewardship with, not ownership, not abuse. And remember, even amongst all of us, how our every existence is actually coded into casual abuse, even when we're the best we can be. So my only last point would be, I think the work in the precision of your language and care is the root. And then we must recode everything else around us. And everything is available to be recoded and re-put back in right relationship, in a relationship which is extraordinary and different. And I think it's an honor for us to be here and an honor to be in front of you, because I think you're doing the real deep work upon which many of us sit, and the liberation that we're talking about can be enabled. So with that, I thank you.
Thank you so much. Just going to let that land. Thank you. Over to you, Fab.
Unlocking this thing because I need to rely on my notes. All right. We can process what was just said while I do this. All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing your Friday nights with us. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. And thank you, Farzana and Nusrat, for all your labor of love from the beginning until now, and for also inviting me alongside these rock stars. It's a real pleasure. I'm going to jump straight into some reflections on the report, which you all have in front of you. So I'll start by what I think the report isn't. And I think the report isn't actually a report in the traditional sense. So especially for those of us used to intro, my name is Farah also, but somewhere in the report my bio's there, so I'm not going to talk about my background for now. So especially for those of us who are used to reading reports produced in the third sector, but especially in the philanthropy sector, this will not be that. It's not going to be the report that says we've delivered 4 events and supported 62 women. You know, it's none of that. It's also not going to be a roadmap with digestible solutions, you know, step A, step B. There's a time and place for that, but the report instead offers a roadmap of visionary ideas and such rich lessons around the UK philanthropy space, around movements, around the body, as well as I think it gives quite a deep analysis of just how dire our current world is. And then it also offers beautiful ways where we can create, as you said, the new coding, so new ways of being, new conditions. So I can go on for ages, but just to say, it's a really incredibly rich text and so personal. I cried a few times, partly because I'm a Cancer, but also just it's such an affirming text. It has, I think for me, what captured me is just that it sets out ways that I long to be. So I hope you all enjoyed the read. And then, because, I really stuck to the homework, but the second section I'll move to after reflecting on the report is just to speak a little bit about my current work or experiments. So I'm not going to speak about my 9 to 5. I'll just mention a campaign, a grassroots campaign that I'm part of, and Jalal is part of as well. And the campaign is called Gaza Families Reunited Campaign, and it's building on the work of 350 Palestinians in the UK who are trying to reunite with their loved ones. So the campaign is asking for 3 key things. One is a visa similar to the Ukraine visa that was created following the Russian invasion, for people to get here in a dignified way and be able to reunite with their loved ones. The second ask is, of course, and always, a permanent and immediate ceasefire in Palestine. And then the third is the respect, or for the UK to respect the right of return for Palestinians. But if I zoom out a little bit, just to kind of contextualize the campaign, and also thinking about resource, resource in the kind of strict sense, in the money sense. The context is that we're seeing billions being pumped into a settler colonial state, Israel, which continues to ethnically cleanse, thieve, murder people. And then in contrast to that, we have many funders who overnight completely cut aid on Palestinian organizations, just based on vibes, basically. So overnight, not only in Gaza, but also across occupied Palestine, including organizations in the UK and the US who express solidarity with Gaza. So that's millions, and if not billions. And at the same time, kind of bringing it back to the campaign we're working on, we're also seeing people crowdfunding, like every day you'll see 5 new links or something, crowdfunding not only for basic necessities to, let's say, build a tent, but also for people to evacuate their loved ones. Because at the moment, a lot of you are aware, per person, it costs $5,000 paid to an Egyptian company just so people cross from Gaza through the Rafah crossing into Egypt. So I just wanted to kind of name my thinking around resource and in relation to Palestine. And then going to the third section, I guess, or the third prompt, which is asking, okay, what needs to be resourced now? And also thinking about the words of Terry Beswick, shout out to her. She also asks, what kind of things, so when funders on a whim stop funding, what kind of things cannot be undone? So thinking about things that cannot be undone when funding stops suddenly, I wanted to just conclude with a few things that resource me and resource the people around me, and maybe many of you today as well. One is organizing collectively and coming together during hard times. This is kind of just the most powerful human thing we can do. That cannot be undone. The way we've showed up to Palestine and hopefully other struggles as well, and showing up with the same level of energy. Another is resistance, and I'm gonna avoid saying anything that would get me deported. So I'll focus on the resistance by Palestinians or Palestinian NGOs that decided to cut funding ties with their donors. So they said, we're not gonna take money from you because your stance is crap. That's a form of amazing resistance, in my opinion. Another is mutual aid. And specifically, I want to highlight a Syrian example. I'm Syrian myself, and in the past few months, people in Syria were messaging Palestinians to give them tips on how to survive a siege and enforce starvation. So they were giving them tips around how to make flour with rice. And that's just, mutual aid. And then boycott, following the footsteps of our siblings in South Africa, in India, in Ireland, and other contexts. Boycott, that's such a beautiful thing to hold on to, because it's not only going to make it too expensive for the occupation to last, but it will also benefit us, benefit our, the climate, benefit the worker rights, so many other things. And I'll just conclude with a quote from the report that will stay with me, which is, and there are so many quotes, but anyway, I'll quote this one. It says, "There is no savior. There is no savior to save us if we want to live in reciprocity and mutuality beyond savior complexes and dynamics of power and domination." Thank you.
Thank you, Farah. And again, maybe just allow yourself to let the breath come through and to be with all that's been shared. so we're not like rushing through. Mm. Okay, thank you, Farah. So, Gabby, I'm going to hand over to you, my love.
Hello, everybody. It's such a deep pleasure to be here. As I was preparing this presentation, I realized that I am made and unmade in conversations, and I feel that so much of the healing justice world has been a journey in so many ways. And since we're invoking Audre Lorde, I'm reminded of one of my favorite phrases of hers, of saying, "Have I told you how alive your being alive makes me feel?" So thank you to all of the wondrous, generous healing justice world. And what I spoke about with Farzana was that because of these entanglements, partly what you'll see in this presentation is actually many to and fro conversations that I've had throughout these months since we've known each other, since our encounter in many ways, and how that also comes back into the work that I've been doing. And I was so happy to see as well, to feel recognized in so many of the wordings in terms of the mutual longings. So I'm just very excited. As always, I'm incredibly jet lagged, and usually I zip through my slides in Mexican time. I am on a slower pace right now, so I'm probably gonna just like fast forward through some. But first of all, to say, Gabriela, I'm from Mexico City. I am a daughter from the megalopolis, and I have also shapeshifted several times in my life. But I think that one of the thorough lines that has accompanied me into everyone, from artist, filmmaker, curator, writer, government person, believe it or not, is this phrase: imagination is not a luxury. And I think one of the very first times that I found how powerful this can be in terms of even its small interruptions is when I was part of a collective in Mexico City called Laboratorio Curatorial 060. It was 4 of us, and we did one specific project at the border between Guatemala and Mexico that was called Frontera, Borders, Sketches for a Future Society, and this was one of about 32 projects. But I think that exemplifies things that stayed with me. This is the river that divides Guatemala and Mexico, and at the time, this is 2019, we were focused quite a bit on all of the atrocities of the northern border. But when you actually reflect upon it, everything is replicated in the southern border as well, but you just exchange Mexican authorities, which I think is also something about power in a way that is spoken about in the report, about how the healing that needs to happen so we don't keep on replicating oppression when power shifts. So Guatemex, this place that you see here, we did with 3 fabulous artists. Guatemex, this is the river, Guatemala on one hand, Mexico on the other. And basically, there's no jurisdiction right in the middle of the river, so it's no man's land. And we created the structure. We put internet there, and this is actually one of the biggest crossing spaces between Central America, of people going through Mexico, which is an incredibly dangerous crossing, as you probably know, and into the US. And so there they could actually access a computer that told them all of their rights as they were passing through the territory, all of the safe routes, everybody that would receive them, that would give them food, that would give them shelter, and they could actually chat with somebody 24 hours a day, all volunteers, and basically spell out what they were to expect and also what the rights that they could engage with. So basically this was for me a really interesting example of interruption, because then a lot of press started, and then we started speaking about the atrocities of the northern border, and it didn't change anything, but it was actually a really interesting moment for me to say it's so important to intercede in the symbolic infrastructure of things, to interrupt the status quo, if you will. And this project actually won an award. The award is not important, but this thing that they wrote about the project, the unusual ability to arouse feelings of freedom, imagination, and poetry, which was why they said that they awarded us this. This has been, in a way, something that I wanted to aspire to. I'm not sure I have ever, if you will, been up to the size of that aspiration, but it's something to practice into, and that hopefully I'll try to practice myself into at every moment. So that shifts even into Laboratorio para la Ciudad. At a very weird segue, I became Chief Creative Officer for Mexico City. So yes, a public servant. And very quickly, I led a fabulous team, very young, 28 years on average, half of them from humanities, half of them from political and urban sciences. And there were urban geographers as well as philosophers, because we thought we actually have to ask big questions again. We have to travel back to first principles. And we really wanted to focus on this idea that cities are not only for the human body, but also for the human imagination. So we did several experiments at the beginning, a little bit of a potpourri, until we figured out that we actually needed visions which to aspire to and to move through, as well as a portfolio of experiments of the things that we didn't really know how we actually landed in reality. So it was the scaffolding of reality. And it was incredibly interesting to see that we could, through things such as crowdsourcing the Mexico City Constitution, which is nowadays our highest law, we could, through policy, make reality malleable, which was quite fascinating to me because, to be honest, I did not engage in government before that. And just for as one example of an incredibly progressive constitution that Mexico City now has, in Article 20, we worked directly on this, made Mexico City into a sanctuary city. So when Trump was being elected, it was actually the midterm of Trump. He, as you probably know, used a caravan of people coming from Central America as one of the things of the bad hombres and the reasons for his wall. So this became a political gesture as well. And the reason why, when this caravan passed through Mexico City, instead of being received by military folks and by police, they were actually received with food and shelter and welcome into Mexico City, was actually Article 20 of the Mexico City Constitution. So I found what an incredible power thing policy can be when it's done well. So this actually, I realized the politics of possibility, a suspension of disbelief of what is possible together. And this brings me very quickly into my now existence. One of them is experimentalista, that the name says it all. But basically I have the great fortune of accompanying questions, of adding the emergent, transdisciplinary, experimental, collaborative, creative edge to many of the projects that I'm invited into. And also my wild child that was born about a year ago, that's called the Institute for Everything in Between. So basically, in many ways, I'm so one of the things that I'm researching now through both of them is care and architectures for collective life, which was that slide. So when I say architectures for collective life, I mean like very practical architectures. This is a wonderful project done by Taller de Arquitectura in Mexico that has been working along with indigenous communities in Mexico. That basically a very strange thing happened is that when proper medical services came into the communities, there started being a lot of maternal deaths. And one of the things that they realized is because it was just a clash of systems, and what was needed was rather an enhancement of the doula system that already existed there. So they actually created these types of birthing houses that I find symbolically also very powerful. So architectures for collective life and care can be physical and literal, but they can also be place as architecture, language as architecture, imaginaries as architecture, pluriversal possibilities architecture, social structuring, movement making, structural justice as architectures, and all of this hopefully to enhance care and collective life. So all of my things have disappeared, which is probably like the words have disappeared, which is probably fortunate. But I will skip forward and say that all of this, one of the things that has obsessed me for the last 3 years is the subject of care. And I have had the great fortune, as I mentioned, of accompanying some restless, burning questions of people that I truly admire in this world, sometimes government, sometimes not. And one of the examples of care, if you will, at a city level is with the city of Bogota, an amazing team. We started holding a question of how can a whole city be reimagined around care. And as a definition of care, there's one by John Tronto that I love that says, everything we do to maintain, continue, and repair our world so that we can live in it as well as possible. That world includes our bodies, our cells, our environment, all of which we seek to interweave in a complex life-sustaining web. So this is an iceberg model of capitalist patriarchal economies that is both a lot of fun and also terrifying, which, as you see on the top end, we see all of the visible economy and the GDPs that are measured, the labor contracts. But then there's all of this other pyramid that doesn't get counted into how we count our economies. And one of them is care work, which is mostly done by women. 75% of care work is done by women, unpaid care work, by the way. And so basically the government of Bogota, through a fabulous team led by Diana Rodriguez Franco, who Farzana met in Bogota, actually decided to do something about this. And so they created, along with the mayor, who was the first woman mayor of Bogota, as well as the first openly gay mayor of Latin America, to create a project called Care Blocks that I accompanied in its more experimental edges, which basically took the idea of spatial justice and found out where 1.5 million women that live in extreme poverty with incredibly high care burdens live across the city. And then they created a whole series of interventions around them, where in one care block, just to give you a very quick example, since it's an intersectional thing, they have services for care workers, they have services for senior citizens, for children, for people with disabilities. So that swimming pool that I visited actually just a month ago is usually full of children with disabilities, which is incredibly moving thing. They also have community gardens, they have exercise, all of this completely free of cost. They have free daycare centers, they have places where the women can leave their clothes to be washed and then pick them up when they're done. They have legal accompany services, and they can also actually get new skills. So this is actually the first generation that graduated from the care block system, and they can also get certified for their care abilities. So it's an incredible project. And here you see care as policy and governance. But just as intriguing as care as an in-between quality and as a deep organizing principle for society. Because when you add care to anything, let's say if you think about housing, you can think about, I have these many bodies, we need these many roofs. If you say care and housing, you cannot think of this thing that we did in Mexico, which we called social housing, and is now completely abandoned because of the conditions. You have to think in a very different way. So basically, this takes me as well to another project, and then I had more to say, but I'll end there, which is with Francia Marquez, which is the vice president of Colombia. Francia Marquez is a land defender since she's 13. She went against the Canadian mining companies and won. Colombia and Mexico are the two most dangerous places in the world to be a land defender. So this is truly putting people's bodies into motion. And she is now the vice president of Colombia, which is quite an extraordinary thing. So with her, and I am part of the advisory group as well as coordinator of advisors for the national care system. And because of Francia's trajectory as the first Afro-Colombian women in high power, care is actually taking on really interesting dimensions. One of them is territory and more than human entanglement, just because territory in Spanish, territorio, is the entanglement between land and the human. And one cannot think of human care without thinking of this, or the more than human care. The colonial and collective care, what does it look like? And what does it actually look like to be able to design a next generation care infrastructure that takes into account that there needs to be an official state response, but that we also need to allow for hyper-local responses to care to be possible, but not with the state then disappearing, but actually being able to support local efforts. So all of these things are into play. We will be unveiling the plan in about 2-3 months. But it's been incredibly interesting because this is speaking to the relational and pluriversal infrastructure, to how do we think about social and participatory scaffolding that is just as dynamic as the complex issues we want to address, and just as creative and diverse of a societies. And then also the big questions of how we go and scaffold into reality. So I will leave it at that, but just to say that this is partly, I think, the explorations that could be had in terms of what do life-affirming infrastructures look like. And many of the questions and the provocations that were present in the beautiful, beautiful resourcing social justice. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gabriela. So many feelings right now. So many feelings. Okay. Are you ready, Stacey K? Okay, cool. Over to you.
Thank you, friend. Thank you all. I feel very inspired sitting here with you. Hi, I'm Stacey Haynes, and as you can tell from my accent, I'm from the States, California. And I think the first thing that I want to say, so my 30-year experiment has been what is it to do the inner and outer work of social, racial, and climate justice through somatics or through embodied transformation. And I'm going to tell you some about those experiments. But I first want to really acknowledge Nusrat and Farzana, because I got to accompany them in a very intimate way in resourcing racial justice. And You know, it's kind of we have this word emotional labor, but I don't feel like it really says what it takes to, when you're innovating. And the kickback doesn't just come from where you expect it, it comes from close in. You all are noticing what's happening with the progressive left. And I just feel like the pandemic, the profound economic stress, the racial capitalism is already dead. It's dying. We're just living in the wake and the consequences of the wake. But I just really, from a somatic lens, I was like, it's too much pressure for the left to tolerate. And then we started just taking it out on each other in a very intense way. It's been a hard 5 years for so many people. And that also happened to Nus and Farzana in trying to innovate and to hold £1 million of responsibility that was of personal accountability, personal consequence, to try to redistribute in the ways that they did and guide what they did. And I many tears were shed. And many, how you feel everything is your fault? That shame, when shame kicks off, it's just like into shame, back out of shame. You know what I mean? I mean, any of us who are trying to innovate, I feel like that is a part of the road. But I really want to appreciate you too, and what you did, and what'll never be seen that you did. Yeah, thank you. And I also want to thank the folks who work in philanthropy who committed to being a part of resourcing racial justice. When we first got in contact, I was like, I don't work with foundations, because I don't. And but then we had this agreement. I was like, that's your vision. That's what you're doing. And we'll also put as much resource into UK movement leaders as we're going to put into the funders and philanthropy here. But we put you all through it. Like those of you who committed, it's like you did your internal work, you did your organizational work, you had to show up to somatics when you're like, what is this lady making me do? Do you know what I mean? Yeah, look at your face right there. And I just appreciate you all took on the risk of not knowing and being willing to change and be changed, and then turn around and take accountability for changing your organizations. Yeah, I'm like, how else do we do it? That's how we do it. So thank you. Good job. I was so struck by what you said of like it's already dead. And Van Jones, who you all might have heard of, but he used to say, that there's 3 possible futures: ecocide, eco-apartheid, or eco-democracy. Those are the only 3 possible futures. What are we going to do? And I was like, well, first I might throw up, then I'm going to cry, and then I'm going to keep finding my peeps and keep doing the work. Yeah. But I feel like, as humans, we're so creative and we're so profoundly short-sighted. And I'm like, oh, wow, this is going to be intense 100 years, y'all. It's going to be intense. And so inside of that, I go, okay, let me get really clear-sighted about our conditions and then go, who do we need to be? Who do we need to be? And, part of why I'm so committed to bringing somatics to anything that is trying to be revolutionary, life-affirming, deeply transformative, is I feel like, and this is so aligned with what you said, but we embody the very conditions we're trying to change. And when we're trying to innovate, when there's enough struggle and pressure, we revert back to those deeply embodied habits because it's what we got. And then we have generations, right? And then we also have these beautiful, intelligent survival strategies that had us get through, right? What we personally have experienced, what our people have experienced, what our class, our caste has experienced. So we have these survival strategies, but they stop working. They stop working for liberation. They keep working for contraction and separation, but they stop working for liberation. And it is not simple work to transform those. It is beautiful work, it's painful work, it's risky work, it's painful work. it's like, who am I going to be if I'm not that anymore? It's like falling off the edge of the unknown. But one of the things that keeps bringing me hope is it seems like there's a collective longing, and remembering. And that we're asking the same questions, we're fumbling along next to each other. Of course, there's so many brilliant peoples at our backs on whose shoulders we stand. But what also gives me hope is I really feel like we as these creatures, as these somas, as we say in embodied work, there is a draw and an intelligence and a know-how that's already existing here when we learn how to unnumb it, when we learn how to listen to something deeper than the reactions or survival strategies. And there's a guide that came with this 3 billion years of evolutionary wisdom. And, may it help guide us there. Yeah. We're self-healing creatures. And I don't just mean like medically, something much deeper, like spiritually self-healing. If we can keep practicing, getting out of our own way, connecting, learning, falling down, getting back up, right? All these pieces. And I just feel like RRJ was a great experiment of bringing in somatics and going, what did it serve? What did it not serve? Yeah. But I really trust that we are life moving toward life. Can we practice that? Can we be rigorous with it together? Can we transform what's in the way of it? That's what we're in the midst of. So today in this very room on day 300 of our training together, of our practice together, it was a deep room. There's some very big healing. That was amazing and shocking. And then we end up laughing together. But I don't know if there's any way over, only through. Yeah. So thanks for risking. Thanks for being here. Thanks for knowing and not knowing. And I didn't tell you any stories about what I was going to. But here's what came out instead. I do want to tell you one story, which is in the U.S. there's an organization called the National Domestic Workers Alliance. Right? Home health care workers, nannies, house cleaners. When labor rights were passed in the United States, farm field workers and house care workers were blocked out of labor rights in 1940 because of the history of slavery in the United States. And the southern states would not sign on to any labor rights unless those folks were left out. Thus, Cesar Chavez, Dolores Huerte, the farm workers movement, and the domestic workers movement. For the first time in U.S. history right now, in D.C., senators, it's to the level of we're about to pass a national care workers set of labor rights in 2024. That's deep. But Ai-jen Poo, who I've known for many, many years now, we got to partner with her in the first 8 years of National Domestic Workers Alliance and basically be doing embodied leadership, embodied organizing, and somatics and trauma healing for all of the member organizers. So we'd have 60, 70, 80 people for a year. We'd spend 20 days together in 3 or 4 languages, depending on the weekend, and we would practice together, and we would heal together, and we would work on our default reactions together to transform them to be aligned with life, with power, with staying connected under pressure. I'm always, always grateful to Ai-jen and the visionary that she is. But there's a lot of those experiments happening in the States, and I feel very honored to get it to be in co-creation with Resourcing Racial Justice and Healing Justice London to keep experimenting. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, beloved ones. So we have a little bit of time for Q&A. Then we're going to have the amazing Yvonne come and give us a little ting, talk to us, drop some pearls of wisdom. This is your opportunity to just ask questions to this panel. I don't know, you might want to ask questions to each other. There's so much wisdom in this house. We got Sister Baljit Sandhu over there. We got Brother Derek Bardowell over there. There's a lot of wisdom in this house. So you might want to talk to each other. But just in case you want to talk to the panel, do your thing. I got the mic. Anybody want to ask anything of anyone up here? Mates, I know it's Friday evening, but come on. Like, really, nothing, like, you lot, thank you.
Hi, so my question is to Farah. It's a difficult question, sorry. But a very inspiring work. What are you doing with the Palestinians, trying to get them safely to here to reunite with their families? But in terms of moving Palestinians out of their homes in Palestine, what do you tell people who claim that Palestinians should stay, and even if they have to sacrifice their lives, we can't deport them because that's what Israel wants? So what do you say to that claim?
This is my plus one, so I literally went like this. Don't ask questions. Yeah. So the question, I think, is an interesting one, because as a campaign, sometimes we're looked at with suspicion, because people are worried that such campaigns are facilitating the exit of the people who are native to the land. So it's quite a tricky terrain that we are functioning under, and because there's already distrust, as Stacey mentioned earlier, like already in our spaces there's so much distrust between movements, so we sometimes have to deal with that by visibilizing who we are, and always also bringing in people from Gaza, from Palestine, to say, to speak, you know, for themselves, to say why they want to have a safe route for their families to exit. And of course, even amongst Palestinians, there's not going to be one uniform opinion on this. Some folks will say we need to stay, we're the owners of the land. Some people will say, well, you know, our lives are the most precious that we have, we need to kind of go out and find life. But what this highlights is just the tragedy that people have to make such choices, and that we're in a space where we're at a record number in terms of displacement around the world. And what do you do with that? What do you do with the amount of severed relationships and this relationship that we've lost to each other, to our lands? Thank you for your question.
Love it when a +1 decides to come through. I got you. I see you. Okay. So questions from anyone else? I know it's Friday evening. I know you've had the weeks that you've had. But is there... Oh, comments. Direct Jones.
Thank you. Greetings everyone. This is for everyone in the room, not just the panel. There's something that happens. Sorry, I'm going to stand up. Bear with me, because I'm trying to process this myself as I'm asking the question. There's something that happens when you're experiencing something that becomes unnameable. And I say something because often we can't capture it. We can't name it. It hasn't been created yet in language. And listening to the panel, and Gabriella, your presentation, I was like, how do you capture that? How do you name? And you can see I'm struggling, right? You can see I can't, the language doesn't exist. And a lot of what we do, there is no language for it. So going back to what you said at the beginning, please forgive me, Johal. Indy, sorry. Indy, you said about new codes. And I'm wondering if people here have found a way to capture name the unnameable. Because, yes, there's ways we can do that in text, but reading isn't always accessible. So then what other ways can we capture the uncapturable? So it's something I want to put out to everyone. It's not easy. Sorry, it's Friday. But, yeah.
Does anybody who wants to?
So Javier, somebody who was part of the collective that I mentioned at the beginning, he's a philosopher, and his thesis that stays with me to this date started off with a really interesting reflection on how in some cultures, language will never be enough to explain reality, and hence the real name of things has to be hidden, because if you name things in their real name, you would actually possess their souls. And reading was my first love. Like I read when I was quite young, and it was truly, yes, my first huge mysterious love. But then Javier actually also goes on to explain another relationship to language, which is the opposite, that reality will always overflow language, and that they are just precarious placeholders for all of the things that we would wish to say, that we would wish to know. So this takes me to two things. One of them is, I think the creation of language is such a beautiful thing. I was talking when Indy and I met a while ago, of how it would seem to be that language actually even is taking possession of our bodies. Like, you know, there's a whole idea of homo narrens, which is, instead of homo sapiens, the species that knows, it's homo narrens, it's the species that tells stories. And we become our stories. So I think that we need to be very careful about the stories that we tell. First of all. Second, I also think that there's something that has intrigued me to no end, which is the poetic. Because what poetry does, I think, is many times point to the gaps and point to the tensions, and there's a play of language that allows for dynamism to exist. And so I actually think that there's politics, and I don't mean just government, but ways of being in the world and of defining who we are to each other and all sorts of things, that has tried to be very precise. And I think precision sometimes is important, but I also think that there's a poetry that I feel Farzana and team embody so well, that is necessary because you don't know really what you heard. And at the same time, there's something that has been invoked, I feel, in language. So while we create the language, how do we also point to the gaps? And then how do we find a language beyond language, which is, for example, dance? No, just like literally bodies moving together. I don't know what you think, Stacey, but you know, for me, that is one of the most healing, beautiful moments of collectivity and of speaking in other ways and in different forms that I can think of.
I'm not going to be as profound as that. I think my experience of this has been the traps of language and the unusual traps. Like my experience, personal experience on this was when people used to say, you know, Indy, can you use plain English? And I was like, what is this? And there's an art of control which is rooted in the reduction of language to the act of communication, not conversation. And communication, the bandwidth of communication is small, but the bandwidth of conversation is infinite because it's dialogic. And I think we've been trapped and coded by a worldview which is rooted in communication, rooted in the idea of the simple language, which actually destroys the vast beauty of the world around us into the reductive qualities. And I remember often being told, Indy, the way you talk, it's great if you maybe talking in Westminster, but it's not good if you're talking in Plymouth. And I found exactly the opposite. Because actually it's not about, actually the world can understand much richer complexity because they feel it. It is the reduction of language to simple words that is actually wanted by Westminster, because they live in a world of abstraction, not in the embodiment of that complexity. And I think we have to reclaim the complexity and the beauty of language in its fullness and not be dumbed down by the simplicity of communication. This, I think, was the most strategic error, because it narrowed us and shortened us and made us weaker and more fragile and more vulnerable and not anywhere near poetic enough to describe the world we needed to describe or the liberation that's actually rooted, because it's non-finite, it's infinite in that process. So I think there's some things very precise about the nature of control I've personally experienced, and I think many of you have experienced. And it's the simplicity of those control techniques that we have to break and liberate free from.
Actually, can I say something? Dorette and I work together. We're sisters. We're that's my OG. That's my ride or die. One of the things that was coming up for me as I was listening is how our movements on these islands really pushed us to take spirit out of our movement. So we, like, the way that the left progressed was to be like, there is no spirit. And if you talk about spirit, then like there's something wrong with you, and you're like, you know, you're like, it's not tangible, like it's not progressive, you like, it's not rooted. And if I think about the emergence of movements like Million Women Rise, that where Sabrina explicitly called in spirit at the outset, and now I look and I see how RRJ have been, and like how Healing Justice are, and how many of our spaces are now much more explicitly going, yo, we move with spirit, we move with prayer, we move with ancestors. I did not, 20 years ago, I didn't think that was possible. And we use words to call spirit, but we also use our bodies to call spirit. And so I don't think it's an either or. I think it's words, it's language, it's codes, but the codes aren't always words. The codes are sometimes in painting, the codes are in movement, the codes are, you know, and sometimes people just don't need to understand what we're saying anyway, because it's for us. Because I'm also here for strategic gatekeeping. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so what strategic gatekeeping? It's just like, it's not for you.
And with that.
And with that. And with that. Okay, time for one more question, and then we're going to ask Yvonne. Oh.
Hi, my name's Thalia, and you're going to have to bear with me because I hate speaking in front of people, but I really wanted to sound back a reflection to you guys, because I feel so honored and welcome to be in this space, and I've existed in a lot of different spaces, whether that's charity or education and now university, and just the everyday violence that comes with being in those spaces, every day having to justify your existence and your approach to things is something I think that really breaks down your soul to an extent. And to just come here and see everyone so unapologetically back what you do, and like, I look up to all of you so much, and it's amazing to hear all of your stories and to be in this room. But I guess if I had a question, it would be about intergenerational working and how you approach that, because I'm only like 25, so I would just really like to be in more spaces like this and bring more people my age into these spaces so that we're all represented all the time.
Quick one. I just came back from Sri Lanka, accompanying a collective of women artists, feminists, activists across South Asia that are doing some quite fascinating work. And this was one of the big things that we spoke about, is how do you actually weave together both lineage and legacy? And the lineage and legacy weaving of it is actually, I was telling them that I just saw how banana peels can be weaved into a really long rope, where a very tiny banana peel actually can become kilometers in length. And I think this is the intergenerational work. My oldest friend and colleague is 86, and my youngest friends and colleagues are about 20. So I think that this is a thing to put into practice, and that, yes.
thank you for your kind comments. Yeah, I think maybe because you shared something personal, I'll also get a bit personal. But for me, entering RRJ, so okay, in the report they mention how for a lot of the grant partners that received funding, for them that was maybe the first time they received funding. So they, by that, RRJ then opened the door for other funders to also resource the same partners. And so with that, they set a track record. And I feel like the same happened to me, because I was in a very low stage of my life, and then luckily I met Nusrat and then applied for the job, got it with RRJ. And then that was the start of me setting my track record, because before that, yeah, I wasn't taken seriously necessarily. And also maybe I didn't take myself seriously necessarily, because one of my tendencies, which I found out through Stacey's work, was that I shrink myself when I'm under pressure or when I'm shy or whatever. My tendency is to shrink myself. And so if I had kept doing that without other people having faith in me, you know, I don't know where I'd be today. So I think for me, it's kind of a thank you for the people who believed in me, and also an invitation to myself and others to take younger people seriously as well, and like give them opportunities and hear them out, because they're the ones, as you said, who are gonna kind of continue. Yeah, thank you.
I love this question. Thank you. Is anyone else hot?
Some of us have personal summers.
I'm having a big personal summer. Anyone else who has hot flashes? It's like, woo, add heat. I feel very, very grateful in, one of the kind of broader social norms inside the States is to be ahistorical. And it is a really convenient way to pretend that the US wasn't founded through colonization and slavery. And just like, oh, just knew better, more, just keep moving forward, But I feel very, very thankful that also in my 20s, I found a lineage. I found a path of practice that named where the practice came from, and the multiple rivers that kept joining and evolving in what we call a living lineage. And I just feel so thankful. And inside of that, there's people of many ages, but there's always this looking of like, how's your embodied practice? What's embodied in you that you could pass on to someone else because you've practiced it so much? But that orientation I find so uplifting, empowering, and inviting. So inside of that, it's like, okay, what do we want to be practicing together? Who's already practiced it? Who can we learn from? Who can we pass it on to? That orientation is a living orientation of path instead of kind of position. Yeah. And I also I have to jump back to the other question because I loved it so much. To me, sensation and feeling and emotion exist before language. And we get talked out of those because of white supremacy and because of patriarchy. It's like they're not valid forms of communication, but I think they're the original communication, right? Sensation is happening, aliveness is happening all the time, and then that expresses as impulses or emotions, or we read each other. It's amazing. If we just let ourselves be like pay attention to each other and let ourselves be known, then language gets sprinkled on top of that. And I also believe in the power of naming and the power of language, but there's a whole sea and world that we're exchanging that doesn't have that much to do with language, or language just points to it, but we know what each other mean. So, loving on that a little bit.
Thank you. So I have a sort of a bit of my relationship with my past is probably a little bit of violence in my own past, and I suppose I feel incredibly called by future generations. People often talk about ancestors going backwards, But perhaps some of the things that happened to me in my past, my biggest way forward, and I don't think any of us are complete individually, we're complete with other people. But my inherent bias is also, I think there's something extraordinary waiting for us. And I think the three choices you gave us of ecocide, eco-apartheid, and eco-democracy, I think ecocide, we all die, so it's not a choice. Eco-apartheid, we all die because we live in mutually assured destruction. It's not a choice. There is only one choice, and that is a life-affirming choice. And I think that's what's calling me. And I feel we often talk about ancestors only in the past, but I think there's future generations inviting us equivalently with the same force. And I have a bias towards that. That has its own weaknesses as well, and I want to acknowledge that has a weakness. So every strength has a shadow, which you have to be in careful consideration with.
Thank you so much. Just going to close us off. For us to be in this work intergenerationally, we as people that are deemed to be elders have to deal with how we hold power or willingness to actually share power and disrupt. And at the same time, having younger folks also not erase all that has gone before. And so there's actually something about a mutual reverence. And actually, when we come from ethnocultural contexts where eldership equals deference, there's something to actually shred there and just actually ask maybe we could hold each other with mutual care and respect and reverence. And so it's not just about having more of you in the space, it's how we be in the space together. And that's all our work. But us, like older ones, sometimes really need to deal with ourselves. Because we're really like, some of us are just like bang out of order and not willing to shift power. So, beloved ones, thank you so much. And hello, thank you. Yes, thank you, yes, this is beautiful.